All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this week's masterclass as part of Conversations in Agave. I'm Susan Koss with Mezcalistas. I'm very excited this evening to be talking pulque and distilling pulque with Raza Zaidi of Wahaka Mezcal and Back Alley Imports. And we also have tonight Jorge Viveros, who is the owner of the distilled pulque company, Fuerte, which we'll also be talking about. I'm going to turn it over to these guys to get going. We're recording. We will be sending the link out toward the end of this week. And eventually, I feel like I say this all the time, we will be posting all of the links up on the Mezcalistas website, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. And with that, Raza, regarding questions, if you have any questions, we'll have time at the end for Q&A. If it is something that is pertinent to what's being said at the time, just type it in the chat screen and I'll make sure that we address it. Thanks very much. Okay, Raza, go for it.
Sure, thank you. Well, first of all, thanks to Mezcalistas for not only all they do for the category of mezcal and Mexican spirits, and but also for continuing this their events, when given the drastic conditions that we're in. So thanks a lot for having us here. And finally, I hope that everybody who's on the line is keeping in good health, and as long as as well as your families. So hopefully everybody's well, and we'll make it through this, and we'll be able to raise a glass of a little veladora glass of Fuerte and Mezcal to everybody's health at one point. So again, also along with me is Jorge Viveros. So I'm going to walk everybody through, sort of the how you make pulque, or the history of pulque, a little bit of the history of pulque, and then finally we'll turn it over to focusing on the Fuerte product and their methods of distilling pulque. So with further ado, and then as Susan has said, post question. I'm not going to be monitoring the questions, but if you have any, post them in the Q&A there, and Susan will interrupt, and either myself or Jorge will answer them to the best of our knowledge. So pulque, and what is pulque? It's this is as the invitation said, it's the original alcoholic beverage that existed in Mexico prior to the Spanish conquest, and it's not a distilled product. It's just strictly a fermented product, and it's basically made from the fermentation of the sap, or aguamiel as it's called, from the agave plant, and typically two main species are used, or varieties are used, the Salmiana and the Atrovirens, depending on which part of Mexico you're in. And again, this was a pre-Hispanic alcoholic beverage, mostly from central Mexico. So the history is not 100% known as all of these things, but they think it was mostly popularized by the Otomís in sort of central Mexico, sort of little north of Mexico City, Querétaro, San Luis Potosí, Hidalgo, that area. But it was vastly popularized by the Aztecs, and in Nahuatl, the word for pulque is meoctli, or simply octli. Michoacán, the Purépechas call it ñogui, and this and that. But pulque is the Spanish word, which etymologically speaking, I think comes from the word poyuki, which means rotten. So I think another name for pulque that the Aztecs used was like poyuque octli, or something, poyuki octli, or something like that, which was sort of rotten agave, for fermented sap. So that's why pulque really, even though it comes from, it's the Nahuatl word and the Spanish words are nothing like each other. Is on a simple glance. So how do you make pulque? It's a very different process. So when the plant reaches maturity, so in the case of the Salmiana, about 7 or 8 years old, a big huge gash, a big huge hole is made in the top of the plant. So they castrate it. They remove the growings of or the beginnings of the quiote as usual, and remove the meloyote, as they call it in central Mexico. I mean, for I imagine given the Mezcalistas history, the majority of the audience is more familiar with some of the Wahaka terminology, but in Oaxaca they call it cogollo, but in central Mexico they call them meloyote, the heart. This is where the leaves start coming, fluoresce, and the stalk comes out. So they remove that, and then they do this big huge hole, which they call a cajete. And after a few months, well, the plant really goes into shock, right? From it's like, injuring itself, and it starts eventually, after a few months, starts to secrete the agave sap, or aguamiel, as they call it in Mexico, no? And so the person who collects the aguamiel is called a tlachiquero, and they have various tools that they use to do their work. What you see there, the first one on the right, the acocote, is it's typically a hollowed out squash gourd, where they make 2 punctures on the bottom and the top, and then they use it to put inside the narrow area, space in between all of the leaves and thorns, and suck the aguamiel into the acocote, and then dump it into a vessel that they use then to carry back to the hacienda or wherever they're producing, to put into the tanks. And then what you see on the left is a raspador. It's a scraper. After they remove the aguamiel, they scrape the inside of the gash again, and to really in essence re-injure the plant. But they, in the parlance of the tlachiqueros, they say it's so that it sweats again, para que sude, no? So those are some of the tools of the tlachiqueros. And then the plant can produce up to about 10 liters a day. The tlachiquero will typically come once or twice to remove the aguamiel and scrape it again. And this goes on for about 3 or 4 months until eventually the plant is kind of done and dried up and dies. No, but the aguamiel is a very interesting, a very sort of sweet, it's pure sugar pretty much, and it has a lot of these sort of nutritional properties that you also, you could associate very similar to like coconut water, no, where it's just a very high in sugars but high in nutrients. And so if you ever get a chance to drink aguamiel straight out of the cajete, I highly recommend it. It's really delicious. And obviously it still doesn't have much in the way of acids, no, which is what will happen during the fermentation process. So those are some of the tools. The ones that you see here are very modern. That acocote is actually made out of fiberglass, but obviously some of the, in the original days, it was what you see here, some more older tools. The acocote on the left is is the actual squash gourd, and then sort of a more ancient scraper, there on the right. More tools, what you see here is the vessels that they put on the donkeys. So these you see they put that around the donkey, and then the 2 vessels go on each side of the donkey and are used to sort of bring the aguamiel from the fields back to the tinacal. No? And the tinacal is where you ferment the product. The aguamiel, no, see, these are huge plastic vats, but obviously you also, in very similar to those of you who are familiar with mezcal, you'll have vats made out of pine, you'll have vats that are made out of cowhide, and in stainless steel for very large modern productions. So, but in this case, this is an hacienda in Estado de Mexico called San Bartolome that I visited, and they use big huge plastic vats. No? And pulque naturally ferments. It takes about 10-15, no, probably about 15-20 days, of course, depending on the weather, and eventually it'll have this natural fermentation and start turning into pulque. It takes, again, and reaching about 4-7% alcohol, and that's when it's sort of ready to be drunk. And it keeps on fermenting, so the shelf life of pulque is relatively small, and that's an important point that we'll come back to later when we talk about destilado de pulque. So those are the tinacales, and again, the final product is it ends up a little being less translucent than aguamiel. Aguamiel is pretty translucent, but once you start distilling it, it has more of a saliva-like consistency, and it starts developing a certain more acidic flavors. No, it's a very hard, it's a very hard product to describe what it tastes like. Now, if you read online, you'll see when people are saying, "Well, what does pulque taste like?" Well, it's like, well, pulque tastes like pulque. But it is, it is very, if you've ever chewed into the agave, the cooked agave, you do have a clear agave flavor, much higher in sugar, first on the aguamiel, and then again, much more acidic on the pulque, and it is, I do have to mention that, pulque is to some degree an acquired taste, no? So, I mean, even within Mexico, there's not a large percentage of people that actually like it, and in order to sort of increase the acceptance of pulque, the pulque natural, as you see right here, is then mixed in with other fruits and nuts and berries, and they are turned into what are called, pulques curados. And here, this is a photograph at a pulqueria in Mexico City in Colonia Doctores, and you'll see their curados up there with guayaba, with oat, with pine nuts and berries. So there's also pineapple, tomato, coconut. So that's a sort of a lot of flavors, and as you can imagine, just like with mezcal, like whether you should be, drink neat or drinking cocktails, there's the equal controversy in the pulque world, so the hardcore fans would say, you got to drink the natural, and I'll never drink a curado, and so on and so forth, but it is again an acquired taste, and there are some delicious curados, so that's kind of the the process on how it's made, but it's important to. Did you have questions, Susan, or no?
No, sorry, clearing my voice.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
So again, it is important to express how important the pulque has been, historically, just like just as another representation of the importance of the agave or the maguey plant to Mexican culture, and so, historically speaking, in the days of the Aztec, the pre-Hispanic time, the drinking of pulque was very much of a controlled substance. It was mostly utilized by in religious ceremonies by the priesthood, and sometimes for militaries, but it was very, very much controlled, and sometimes they allowed older folks to drink it. So here, what you see is one of the codexes. This is the Codex Tudela, which was most of these codexes were drawn by the Aztecs for the Spaniards to take back to Spain to explain what life in Mexico was like. So what it was like. So here, this was, I think, from the 1540s. They're showing how the priests are, drinking, and I guess in Mexico we would say in el wiri wiri, just hanging out, drinking pulque, and. I know you're all wondering why they're naked from the waist down. And if you tune in next week to my webinar called Sexual Customs and Practices of the Agave Priesthood in the late 1300s, you might find out. Anyway, moving along, again, pulque sort of attracting the, the interest of artists and its representation, becoming very extremely important to, by all walks of life in the arts. And also on the left, a photograph of, Edward West from, in the 1920s, showing one of the pulquerias in Mexico City. And of course, on the right is an excerpt of Diego Rivera's mural in the Palacio Nacional, where he's showing the whole production. So there you see the tlachiqueros up on top. And then on the bottom, you see the fermentation vats of the pulque. And the pulque heartland, as I mentioned, is pretty much the central Mexico, what they call the altiplanicie. It's this very very high altitude, 1,700 meters, and very sort of semi-arid. And Hidalgo and Tlaxcala produce, just like Wahaka produces, 80-90% of all the mezcal. Hidalgo itself produces about 80%, maybe 80% of all the pulque. and then followed by tiny little Tlaxcala, no, which is maybe produces about 12, 13%. And then beyond that, Estado de Mexico, Puebla, Mexico City itself, you can actually still go to, sort of the eastern parts of Mexico City and southern, near Xochimilco, and find a few pulque production there. Further north, San Luis Potosí, and then to the lesser degree, Morelos, Michoacán, Querétaro, Guerrero, Wahaka, and Veracruz. No? So that central area being sort of the heartland of pulque. And again, pulque was such a massive industry that some of the richest people in Mexico in the 1800s were hacendados pulqueros. No? So they owned haciendas that produced pulque in the 1800s, and up until the 1880s, there were up until the Mexican Revolution, really, there were some of the richest people. And so I'm going to show a few video photographs that I've taken throughout travels throughout that heartland area, just kind of jumping into some of these haciendas. And I think in the heydays, it was like maybe 500,000 liters produced a day, of which maybe 350 to 400,000 would be shipped into Mexico City. Obviously with the beginnings and the popularity of the trains, it was suddenly became very easy. So these hacienda pulqueras really flourished in that era. So this is one I shot. This one's called Sontecomate, I think, and it's this one's in Hidalgo. And so you see the Agave Salmiana grown on the land itself, and then you could just see the massive opulence of these haciendas. And the actual, in this one, I didn't fly by. A little to the right there, you see where, and now you can't see it anymore, is where the tinacales were. But this just, you just get to see the size and the massive opulence of these haciendas pulqueras. No? This one now is really just, it's owned by some folks in Pachuca, and they just rent it out for weddings and special events, for filming telenovelas and all that sort of stuff. So that's right. That's just the photograph of Sontecomate. This one's San Bartolome, where those tinacales were. And here, where I'm standing here, if you look to the right, you'll see the fields. And then those tinacales that I showed you before were there to the left. But what you see in front here is the actual house of the hacendados. And, in a lot of these haciendas, you had like your own private church, right, which you see on the right there. This one's, again, San Bartolome is in Culpalalpan, I think, in the Estado de Mexico. This is Ixtafayuca. This is Tlaxcala, no? And this one is just massive. I'm actually standing in about the middle of the hacienda. So if I make a 180 turn and photograph the other way, it's almost the same length the other way. So these are just really, really beautiful, really impressive. And that whole central part of Mexico is littered with hundreds and hundreds of these haciendas. But just again to show you the how big of an industry this was in the late 1800s. And then at some point around that era is when, again, just like with mezcal, the actual origins of when they started distilling pulque is not very well documented. But you can imagine that when the Spaniards conquered and brought the stills with them, somebody said, hey, if this shit naturally ferments to 4 or 5%, imagine what would happen if we would distill it. So at some point they started distilling it, and that's sort of, again, the origins of Comiteco in Chiapas. There's also a lot of old sort of historical documents that talk about mezcal de pulque. Pulque, obviously, once mezcal was actually invented, pulque actually being a natural way to kick off the fermentation phase, right? So instead of waiting for the natural fermentation, if you added pulque, which already had fermenting going on, it was a very quick way to kickstart the fermentation phase. So there's a lot of mezcales that where you add pulque during that fermentation phase, but But the destilado de pulque itself in central Mexico was popularized a lot in the 1800s as a way to utilize pulque that wasn't sold as, you know, that was shipped to Mexico City and had not sold past its its drinkable, you know, its shelf life. You know, so as it started over fermenting, instead of throwing it out, they would the pulquerias in Mexico City would ship it back to the haciendas, and there it would be distilled. You know, and that's kind of how destilado de pulque came about. You know, and then unfortunately, you know, with the Mexican Revolution and the popularity of beer, you know, obviously hacendados kind of were a big target of the uprising. You know, so a lot of them fled their haciendas and even the country. And then beer was also really popularized then as well. And there was a fair amount of disinformation campaign against pulque itself. You know, a lot of newspapers would publish these fake articles claiming that one of the part of the process of making pulque was to add this thing called a muñeca, which actually is true. They would add a rag, you know, soaked in the mother pulque, you know, which already had fermentation to kick off fermentation. But the way the articles would wrote it was that it was that the muñeca itself was rat shit, you know, like excrement, and so it got a very bad reputation and really declined tremendously throughout the 20s, 30s. No, I mean, the turn of the century, there's about 1,000 pulquerias in Mexico City. When I was growing up in the 70s, 80s in Mexico City, there was maybe 20, 30, 40 at the most. So with the fall of pulque, the destilados de pulque is completely disappeared. No? So that's kind of why, you know, many of you may have not, even though you may see yourself as sort of agave distillate and mezcal aficionados, may have not heard of it before. No? And so Jorge is the as I mentioned, he's the managing partner of the Huerte brand, and he's sort of taken it upon himself to help revive this this sort of forgotten spirit. You know? And so we've, you know, as many of you may know me as sort of the managing, you know, one of the owners of Wahaka Mezcal, but we also have this side business, Back Alley Imports, where we, you know, we like to find other interesting products from Mexico that may not make it up here, and sort of help these, you know, sort of fledgling brands, you know, navigate this whole crazy 3-tier system and import and all this and that. And I mean, Oaxaca Mezcal has 10 years on the market, and so we've established great relationships now with distributors, restaurants, chefs, bar managers, bartenders, you know, and so we figure why not help a lot of these companies that are, you know, trying to figure out this whole thing. So without further ado, I'll introduce Huerte. This is a destilado de agave from Tlaxcala. The pulque that they use is made from agave salmiana. It uses a single distillation in stainless steel, and it is made in the state of Tlaxcala. And also, in case for those of you who are not familiar, Tlaxcala is one of the smallest states of Mexico. It's kind of on 3 sides surrounded by Puebla. And then on the west, it touches Estado de Mexico and then a little bit of Hidalgo. No? So it is, again, also in that central highlands of Mexico, and it sort of very, very temperate climate where tons of salmiana grows. No? So, and at this point, if maybe, you know, I'm going to try to ask Jorge some questions to involve him, because we're really seeing, you know, the previous photos that I showed of pulque were actually taken in some of the travels that I had done through Estado de Mexico and Hidalgo, and now these are, so from here on out, it is actually all the production of Huerte. You know? So these are the salmiana fields that they use.
Hey, Raza, can I interrupt you for a minute?
Of course.
Because a question did come in about whether any mature agave can be used for pulque production. And My initial answer was yes, but no. And that maybe you can talk to, why the Salmiana is the primary workhorse of in making pulque.
Pues I don't know the exact. I mean, I don't know the exact sort of if there's any biological answer to that. No, I just from what I know is that that again the area where pulque was first I guess you say invented is predominantly Salmiana. That is the one that I mean by far, and of course it's a cultivatable one, right? So so just like with the mezcales, I mean as you can imagine, when you're producing 300, 500,000 liters a day, you're not going to be using wild agaves for this, and there's not that many cultivatable ones. That the blue didn't exist in the 1800s, and Espadín or whatever. No, and the Salmiana was the predominant. Salmiana and Americana were the predominant cultivatable varieties. No?
Raza, can I add something?
Of course.
About the question, theoretically, you can make pulque from any agave in theory, but as Raza said, most of the agaves don't have so much sap, and it has no sense to use these agaves to make pulque. I tried a pulque from agave marmorata once in Puebla, from Tepestate, and the flavor was very similar. You cannot notice the difference so much, but it was like 10% of the production of agave salmiana. But it was a wild agave. It was not cultivated.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Jorge. So Jorge, these lands, these lands that they used to grow, do you know the altitude, and do you know how many acres or hectares
yes, it's between 1,500 and 1,800
meters above sea level.
Yeah. Yes. When it's 2,000 or it's when the altitude is higher, like 2,500 or something, it starts to, the agaves still grow, but they have smaller production, less sap, and the acres, it's about 20 acres of agaves.
Okay, perfecto. And those are some beautiful plants. That second one from right to left looks massive. No, and also I think it's worth pointing out that you're typically always going to grow these amongst a few other trees, no, because that always gives some biodiversity there, no, and particularly to things like the agua, like when you collect the aguamiel, it'll already start having some bacteria that will naturally ferment.
Yes.
Go ahead.
If you see the space between the agaves, it's to plant something else. They plant different things like beans or
between the row. Yeah, there's a lot of distance between the rows, right? Right. Okay, so here's here's our master distiller, Jerónimo Rosines, and it's a family run operation. So you'll see him doing many of the tasks here. And it's also worth pointing out the natural beauty of Tlaxcala, because just like Puebla or you have an awesome view of both the Popocatépetl and Ixtaccíhuatl. So, or is that Pico de Orizaba? Is that facing the other way? That's Pico de Orizaba, right?
Right.
Yeah. So this is actually closer to Veracruz, but within Tlaxcala itself, you do have a beautiful view of the Popo. But that's Pico de Orizaba, no? Which is, I think, the highest, second highest, third, or the highest. Is that the highest in Mexico? That's the highest, no? That's the highest mountain in Mexico, sorry. So again, he's carrying his his barrel, no, where he's going to decant the aguamiel, and he's he's going out to plants that he had previously already cut open the gash and checks on them daily, and here you see a one of his plants with aguamiel inside it, and so again much more transparent, translucent than the actual finished product, no. And here he is with his La Chiquero tools, so you see him on the left. He's got his scraper. He also is going to have a knife, because as you still have within the leaves all have their thorns, so they typically will cut off the entire sort of end of the leaves of the pencas, to get rid of all of those thorns, so that he can have access to better access to insert the acocote. And in this case, it's a very interesting acocote because it's also made out of wood with metal, metal straps to sort of, where he's kind of shaped it into the shape where he can insert it with a hole into the aguamiel, and then suck from the top to suck the aguamiel into the acocote, and then he'll dump it from there into the barrel. So once the barrel's full, he brings it back to the tinacal, and he'll dump it and from his barrel into the vat. No, and do you know what type of wood these vats are?
Ayacahuite.
What was that?
The name is Ayacahuite.
Ayacahuite. Okay,
It's
that's going to be on the final exam, everybody. So make sure you got it. And they'll typically ferment from 15 to 20 days, or how long does he ferment his pulque?
As you see, he's adding aguamiel, and there is already pulque inside.
Mm-hmm.
He takes from the tinacal. He has like from 100%, he takes like 25% to make the distill of the pulque, mm-hmm. And then he adds like 25% of aguamiel.
Mm-hmm. So it's this constant fermentation process.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And when he makes that process in these quantities, it takes like 7 days, mm-hmm. to have a full pulque.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not in these days. The pulque is not for drinking, as you know, mm-hmm. But it's too acid, so you can use it only for distilling. Of course, if you have more aguamiel than pulque, then the fermentation process is longer.
Right, because there's less. And do you know how long the Master Jerónimo had been making pulque before he decided to do distilled pulque?
Well, it has been, they have made it for generations. Mm-hmm. The hacienda was from his father, and he took it from his grandfather, and all the lines. So since he was a child, he was working at the hacienda.
Muy bien.
Yeah, like he has been like 50 years working.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Okay, and then as Jorge says, they remove the pulque from the tinacal, from the tina, and then they here's more tinacales, and then they start then they load it into the still. No? So this is what is it, like 75 liter still?
It's 200.
200 liter. Wow. So it's so they start they decant the pulque into the still, and then seal it up. Very classy with his bolo tie and pipe. Not many people smoke pipes anymore, no? But does he always dress so nicely for work?
Yeah, it's like traveling through time,
Mm-hmm.
Traveling through these Mexican pictures from the 50s, the way he dresses and all the way of thinking they have. It's he's he works in the army too. He's a colonel.
Wow.
He has always a gun in his, in his back, like in the Wild West or something.
Uh-huh.
And like in the picture, in the movies of the 50s in Mexico.
Sí, claro. Allá en el Rancho Grande.
En el Rancho Grande, sí.
Sí. So there's the and here's the full on still, no? Where you get to see the
Yes, in the right is the distiller that we're using actually this time, and in the left is a new distiller. It's 400 liters, but we're still making proofs with it because the flavor is not the same than with the little one.
and interesting. Well, it
So
makes sense.
this is a completely like different type of still than things we're used to seeing in mezcal production.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the still setup, how it differs, and it's the single distillation?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Me or
For you, I think, more.
for me, yes, it's a single distillation. When they start the distillation, it comes out with about 60% of alcohol, and then it starts coming down. And when he cuts the distillation, the mix of everything is 40%.
So he cut it. So you take it. You take just the body. So you get rid of the puntas and colas.
Yes.
And then whatever he mixes together ends up at about 40.
Exactly. He takes the first part from the first part, like all the distilled products,
Mm-hmm.
to take out the heavy alcohols, and
Right.
you can, when he finishes the distillation, you can still have more distilled product, but it's like 25%. So you have to think, if you keep distilling, then you have to distill it once again. He sometimes makes it to make the pulque richer and have a better product after that. And sometimes he just leaves it because all the expenses he has to do with gas, and it's not worth.
Okay.
And then, so with what does he do with the heads and tails that he doesn't use for any one distillation? Does he hold on to it to use, in a later distillation for another batch, or what happens with that product?
The first part is typically thrown away, and you can actually put it together and make another distillation and leave the heavy alcohols behind it. Normally he throws it away, and with the tails, as I told you, normally he cuts. He doesn't. He cuts on 25%. So from 25% up, it's in the distilled product, and down it's typically normally not used. They don't use it.
So they typically throw away everything, I guess. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a question that goes to if, the most important part of pulque is the bacteria. By distilling it, would it all die off in the process, or?
Yeah,
Yes.
sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, they all die, and because if they would live, they perhaps, you have a lot of alcohol, and you won't, how do you say it? No, normally the bacteria die, and the rest of the bacteria stay in the distiller, and you take only the ethanol and the alcohol.
Yeah. So you do end up with something with a totally different flavor in a way. I mean, you obviously have those same sugars that you can taste in the first the aguamiel and then the pulque, but yeah, it loses a lot of that acidity.
Yeah. Yes, it's like more lactic, more lactic and herbal too.
More herbal floral, I'd say.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it on the production. So we unfortunately we just started this importing, and I think the product arrived in the United States, around the end of February, and we the first customer to buy it was JBS Imports here in California, and then the whole lockdown happened. So we're still sitting on all the product here in California at our warehouse. But for any customers in California, any sort of stores, restaurants, bars that might be interested in California, you can contact JBS Imports if you're a consumer interested in buying. We were able to get, I mean, the great team in at Old Town Tequila, at Old Town Liquors, Roman did place an order before the lockdown and receive his order. So so it's definitely available at Old Town Tequila.
Which does ship around the country. So
for
folks outside of California, you can definitely pick it up at Old Town.
Yep. And if you're a distributor in another state other than California and you're interested, just pop an email to info@Ali Imports, and we can get our warehouse is kind of, I do have to schedule, but I can go pick up things, and so we could easily figure out how to get a sample over to you.
And somebody is asking the price listed on there, $46.99, $47. That's going to be the going bottle cost for it, correct?
Yeah, right. Obviously, that's a retail price, right? So,
retail price.
Yeah.
So yeah, the industry price from the distributor will be different.
Yeah, you can back it off from there and kind of come up with an approximate of what it would be.
Yeah. Well, I feel very lucky that I had the opportunity to try the Fuerte product at our San Diego Mexicana bottle event. And it is a really, it's got a level of, for lack of a better word, meatiness to it. There's just a lot of thickness to it in the flavor. It's very round, and it had a very, very interesting flavor. So I'm looking forward to really diving into it.
Yeah. And a beautiful nose too.
Yeah.
Beautiful nose.
A really beautiful nose. And so what's the ultimate percentage ABV for the bottle is?
We're bringing them in at 40.
At 40, sorry, 40.
Yep.
And then what does fuerte signify?
Well, fuerte is kind of a slangish way to say fuerte. So, yeah. So you could see at the bottle, it's sort of based off of the old, and if you look closely and you look at if you look at the two windows right there, and you might recognize somebody on the label. You see the dude? Yeah.
Oh, that's you?
Yeah, that's yeah.
I mean, there's a question that came up earlier about the flavor of pulque itself and what makes, like how do people consider a pulque a good pulque versus a bad pulque? And, and I semi-answered, it depends on your own personal flavor, like what you like. because, you know, they're different styles of pulque. I have a preference for the pulque that comes from the more southern states, which for me is more effervescent and more like cider, whereas the Mexico City pulques that I've had are pretty viscous.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know if
they're more like saliva. Yeah.
Yep. I don't know if you want to comment more on like the flavors of pulque. And
As I said, it's like, well, you know, two things. No, one is I've never been the best at sort of describing those things. You know, but as I said, it's like if you look at even experts, they'll say, well, pulque tastes like pulque. You know, it's sort of, it is a hard thing to describe. I mean, it's like, and also if you haven't tasted aguamiel, no, it's like sometimes you'll try to describe pulque in terms of aguamiel, but if people haven't tasted aguamiel, it's also somewhat. But it's like I mean, kind of like if you were to make a tepache from aguamiel, no, it's like it just adds those lactic acidic flavors to the sweet, you know, agave, you know, this super sweet agave liquid. One thing that's also worth mentioning that has nothing to do with the taste is also that I did mention that it doesn't conserve very long, and you know, therefore and it doesn't bottle very well. Now, in order to bottle or can it, you have to pasteurize it, which will change the flavor entirely. You know, that's why typically you won't find much. I mean, there's Hacienda 1881, but in general you won't find many brands.
I mean, honestly, the Hacienda 1881 is the only canned pulque or pulque I've had in the United States that I thought was anyway worthwhile in terms of drinking.
It's the only one I've ever actually even seen in the U.S.
Yeah, Ramirez Liquor in Los Angeles used to carry different types of canned pulque, and they tasted very much like candy.
Well, that Hacienda 1881 has some curados too, right?
Yeah. And you know, and they're decent. The question came up of the availability of pulque in Northern California, and I know that there is pulque here. The one gentleman, Salvador, that we used to get pulque from at the Mexicana bottle events, sadly has retired, and I'm not sure his health situation. He's 91 years old now, but he worked with a farmer in the Central Valley, and he was fermenting in his apartment in Oakland, and then also making curados and selling them in Fruitvale, and they were actually, you know, pretty good.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like, you know, from a Mexico City arrogant prick, I would say, since it's not Salmiana, it's not going to be that good. But, you know, so the bad news is, you know, in order to get to taste pulque and understand the flavor, you have to go to Mexico City. The good news is, in order to taste, you know, get the flavor of pulque, you got to go to Mexico City. Right?
This is, or Puebla.
Or Puebla, well, but, you know, typically you would go to Mexico City.
Mexico City.
Yeah, Puebla, Hidalgo. Hidalgo is really as I mentioned, the heartland. But Hidalgo, Tlaxcala, Puebla, Estado de Mexico, all awesome pulques.
Yep. But back to the question about fresh pulque in Northern California. I know that there were other people who were producing it in the Stockton area, but, you know, honestly, as the crackdown on immigration happened, a lot of people went underground, and it's been harder to find fresh sources unless you have a direct relationship with the people making it.
Right. And again, it's like, you know, from an import duties law and all that, it's, you know, it has one ingredient, so it's relatively easy to get all the permits. It's just that it's just not the same when you package it.
Nope. What other questions do we have from folks out there? Especially for Jorge. It was such a lovely surprise to find out he was available and to have him on the call.
Mexico City.
Yeah, well, hopefully when this is over, we'll get him up here one day, you know?
Yeah.
To one of the events, but...
That would be, I mean, that would be nice. It's a really, you know, I mean, it feels like a full circle kind of cultural thing, as we always talk about how pulque is the precursor of mezcal. So to
Yeah.
actually be distilling it is, you know, and to be able to now actually taste that is pretty.
And you right, and you can't think of it as a mezcal, no? And really, it's
Mm-mm.
not a mezcal, no. It's its own thing.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Mhm.
But as somebody else said, delicious. So I'm, oh, I mean, sorry. Are there any pulque distilleries that use production methods that are more like a traditional mezcal? You know, like maybe doing in a clay pot kind of distillation. Do you know anything like that that's happening?
You mean whether there's distilled pulques being done in clay pots? I don't know. I know Jorge has visited a few other producers. Have you seen anybody using anything other than, you know, other than stainless steel, like using old?
So some that the distillation is maybe something different.
Sí, que si hay otros productores de destilados de pulque que hayan, pero que no usen un un alembic, bueno, de acero inoxidable, sino que tal vez usen de barro o de hasta de cobre.
Ah, ok.
Porque sí has visitado otros productores, ¿verdad?
Sí. Well, I found the distiller we have is made of steel, and a part is made of copper. And you know, the pipe that comes out and
the condenser.
And you have to use it because it takes many bad flavors out. And but I saw one that all the distiller was from copper. But you know, I don't. Everybody that all the people that I have known that makes it, they use more steel. I have seen no one that makes from.
So right. So the thing that's worth reiterating is that there hasn't been a continuous production of distilled pulque, no? So that when pulque really went down in production itself, destilado de pulque pretty much disappeared all throughout Mexico, no? So you wouldn't. So even if people had made it that way back in the 1700s and 1800s, it probably, you know, it wouldn't be continuous. The second thing that's worth mentioning is that the destilado de pulques was mostly made by the large haciendas, right? Because as I mentioned, the majority of it was done so that you wouldn't waste the pulque that they had shipped into the. So those are big producers, no, that typically would have copper or steel stills.
Yes, I think the reason because the people you cannot see producers that use ¿cómo se dice barro?
Clay.
Okay,
Clay. Yeah.
You don't see people using this because it's too ancient, and pulque distilled is something that reappeared like 2 decades ago. It's very new and
very recent. The revival is very recent.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, many people don't have. You know, they started making it with what they have around. You know.
Yeah.
I think many of the distilling processes are the same. The people make distilled products from what they have, with the tools they have, and with the products they have around them. In this time of history, it happens to be steel and copper.
Okay.
And then, are there any long-term sustainability issues in producing pulque or destilados del pulque?
Pues, bueno, again, you know, since it's not a wild. I mean, there's two good things. No, one is that you do let the plant live till its end. The second thing is that it's not a wild agave salmiana, so it does produce hijuelos. So it does get to reproduce before you use it for pulque, no? So that's the good news there.
And I would add that you have, when you make mezcal, you can use the plant only once. You can, from an espadín, you can have like 4 liters or something. It depends on the plant, of course, and the weight, but from pulque, because it produces all the time, like 3 months, like Raza said, and you can have much more from a single plant. You can have much more
pulque than yeah, you get way more pulque out of a single plant than you get mezcal out of a single plant.
So it's better for sustainability.
Yeah, that was one of the questions of how much pulque can you get out of a single agave, and
it can produce about 10 liters a day, and then of aguamiel, no? And then the aguamiel is production, it secretes the aguamiel for about 100 days, 100, 120 days. So, so you get about 1,500 liters of aguamiel, and then there's probably some losses when converting from aguamiel to pulque, but not much, just what evaporates there. So yeah, so it's probably, let's say 1,000 liters. Huh?
And what brought pulque kind of back into production after it dying out because of beer production? Then what has caused a resurgence in interest?
Mexico City hipsters. I mean, in a way, in a way, it's sort of the typical Mexico, the general Mexico culinary experience, getting the sort of world renowned and sort of, so as I mentioned, I remember like when I was like 14 or 15 going to this La Catedral del Pulque on Isabela in the Doctores. And in those days, there was maybe 30, 40 pulquerias, right? And I remember there was this one guy who would come in every night at about 6 or 7, and his job, he was like 85 years old back in the 70s, and his job was to fix he would fix the organilleros. No? What are they called in English? Those, in Mexico where you crank the thing and it pumps out music, and they have the other person walking around collecting money. ¿Cómo se dice organillero en inglés? Yeah, you guys know that those instruments. Well, I don't know if you even call it an instrument. With the music, do you know what it's called, Susan?
No, I'm trying to think. I just always think of it as the hand cranked organ with the monkey on top.
So I kind of remember this poor. I was thinking to myself growing up, this guy would come in and it's like these two dying things, pulque and the fixing an organillero, but hey, they're still both around, man.
Organ grinder.
Organ grinder. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that, I think that the same people who brought about a resurgence in the interest of mezcal are, the same groups that brought about the resurgence in interest in pulque, which you say hipsters, or it could, in Wahaka, it was art students who were interested in it, younger people who were suddenly embracing a lot of their cultural heritage.
Yeah.
And the same thing in Mexico City, I think, with the younger students. But a whole bunch of questions popped in, including Fred Sanchez has always had pulque for breakfast. Is that kind of typical across Mexico?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, again, it's like, because it is really more of a social thing, right? I mean, it's not, you typically don't have pulque in your house, It's something, typically it's a very social thing that you go to the pulqueria to do. Not to say that the pulquerias can't be open at breakfast time, but it's.
Yep.
I think.
Sorry. Go ahead, Jorge.
Aguamiel is more in the city you don't get it because
right.
You can get it only in the pulquerias, but in the haciendas and in the where the agaves are, the aguamiel is more likely to be drink by children and all this, because they sometimes play in the field and they have it available and they drink. And in some poor regions where there's the people. They have very poor regions. They drink pulque, and they have made studies that the people that drink pulque have a better, how do you say it? Bueno, tienen una mejor nutrición, a better nutrition than the people that don't drink pulque. And, a lot of children drink pulque, but only in small regions or more specific contexts.
Small doses for sure.
Small doses.
And then, you know, this goes back to kind of the history of pulque and the pulque production. So was the destilado de pulque kind of a byproduct of that era?
Mm-hmm.
That's
of
how
of the colonial era, yeah.
Okay.
Well, or even post colony, you know, like from independence to revolution is kind of was the heyday of pulque and of the haciendas pulqueras and thus destilado de pulque.
And then has there been any sort of a movement to settle on a singular name for the products? Destilado de pulque, destilado de aguamiel, or?
Well, it's definitely not aguamiel, no, it's definitely pulque, right? Because aguamiel is the non-fermented one straight out of the plant. And then pulque is once it ferments. But as far as destilado de pulque, no, I think that, I mean, again, there's, you can count the producers on, well, I don't know how, but there's not more than maybe 20 destilado de pulque producers in all of Mexico now. So it's not an organized industry by any means.
And how many liters of pulque are needed to produce a liter of pulque distillate?
Pues I'll leave that to Jorge. Cuando, o sea, del...
It depends. But typically, when you have a very good pulque with a high level of alcohol, you can take like 10 liters for making 10 liters of pulque for 1 liter of distilled pulque. But some people use 20 liters. It depends. For example, in the raining season, the water comes in the agaves, and the pulque has less alcohol, so you need much more. Or you actually have to do a second distillation to get a good product. You use that.
And we have a couple of cocktail questions, and using the distilled pulque in cocktails. Have you had a chance to talk to bartenders, what they're doing and what might be a good recipe?
Was the bad news from a U.S. standpoint is that you know, the product came in a week before lockdown, no, but I had brought in multiple bottles, no, every time I would go to Mexico City to see my folks and all that, and Jorge, meet up with Jorge and bring bottles back, and I did take them to a bunch of places. I know Mosto had already played around and was looking at putting one on the menu. But Jorge can talk about, because Jorge obviously is in charge of selling the product in Mexico, and he has a bunch of places that already make cocktails, no, in Mexico City. No? A ver, unos coctelitos con Fuerte.
Yeah, we started working with mixology with Fuerte. I find it I like very much this product, especially for mixology, because it's not a very hard, it's not a dominant product, so it's very easy to mix with another ingredients. And the main flavors of the tastes, I would say it's very lactic, as we say, very herbal. So it mixes very good with herbs like I don't know the name in English, pepino, hierbabuena, romero.
See, so rosemary, so cucumber, the wintergreen, rosemary.
And the most extended product to make a mixology is tonic water. It mixes very good with tonic water. You can a very simple cocktail is adding tonic water with cucumber and rosemary.
Rosemary.
Rosemary. Oh, yeah, rosemary. Sorry. Well, but you can make a lot of crazy things. And we made a very complicated recipe here in Mexico with ingredients from all over. We used Cinzano Bianco. We used pineapple juice. We used well, Mexican fruits, very, very special. It was really, really delicious.
Yeah, I could see it going well with tuna.
Ah, and
that would be the fruit, not the fish. For anybody there.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, prickly pear or whatever it's called.
Yep. Is there a season for when you can harvest aguamiel?
Was most, I mean, the dry season is the best, no? So, but one thing I didn't mention in the production is that they typically do cover the hole with a rock or with a board, no? So that particularly the bees love that stuff. But yeah, so to keep the rains out. But Mexico, that central part of Mexico in particular has very little rain. No, Hidalgo, Tlaxcala. I mean, it's like California in a way. No, I mean, there's a rainy season, a short rainy season, and a very long dry season. But yeah, the dry season, so the 9-month dry season is really when you want to do your big bulk pulque production.
And is it, do you think the fuerte or distilled pulque has sustainability when transferred to a cocktail market? And with the question really being into a high volume market.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes. I mean, I think more of the question is whether we could bring it with these producers, being such small producers. The big question I think would be is whether we could bring it in at a price, that the bars would be willing to cocktail with it. That's, I think, our big challenge.
And then a question of where in Mexico, outside of Mexico City, can fuerte be bought?
And we have a production in Baja California and in the Riviera Maya too, in Merida. Tulum, we have something, but we also we send some product to Zihuatanejo. But mainly, we actually we send product to all of Mexico. So we don't have so many places outside Mexico City, like stores where you can buy it. But,
so if someone was in Ensenada, is there any place close in Ensenada, either in Tijuana or any location around there to get the product, or should I connect you guys independently?
Yeah, we have someone in Baja California, but I think it would be better if you contact them directly with us.
Okay.
In Mexico.
I will have Fer send me your email and I will connect you guys directly. Okay. And let's see, any other questions for Raza or Jorge? Thanks. No, I think that might be it. I will just say I'm looking forward to being able to really dig into the fuerte and actually buy it here in the Bay Area, drink it in a bar, etc.
Well, I think we're all looking forward to drinking in a bar.
Yeah,
period. Yeah. Yep.
Period, for sure. But again, for anybody who's interested in picking up a bottle, contact Old Town Tequila online. They have a great a selection of agave spirits overall. And
California premise, and if you're interested, just contact JVS, and if you're a distributor, just again, info@backalleyimports.com.
Great. All right, Raza, Jorge, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Susan, for organizing
the presentation. And everyone else I'll be sending out the link toward the end of the week. Thank you again. Have a good rest of your evening.
Bye.
Bye.